On the morning of March 16, 1968, an American helicopter landed where it absolutely should not have. Below it were U.S. Army infantrymen. In front of them were unarmed Vietnamese civilians. From the air, the scene didn't look like a firefight. There was no incoming fire, no maneuvering, just bodies. One warrant officer stepped out of the aircraft and made a decision that almost no one else that day would make. He aimed his authority and his weapon at his own side. This is not the story of the My Lai massacre as it is usually told. This is the story of the man who tried to stop it. Hugh Thompson Jr. was not a crusader, a firebrand, or a man looking to make a statement. That fact matters more than almost anything else in this story. He was born in 1943 in Atlanta, Georgia, and raised in a working-class family that valued discipline and responsibility. Before Vietnam, Thompson spent time in the U.S. Navy, leaving service briefly before re-enlisting, this time in the U.S. Army. His return to uniform was not ideological, it was practical. Aviation offered structure, advancement, and a clear job to do. Thompson trained as a helicopter pilot, eventually becoming a warrant officer flying OH-23 Raven observation helicopters. The OH-23 was not a glamorous aircraft. It was slow, lightly armored, and vulnerable. Its job was reconnaissance, spotting enemy movement, marking targets, and coordinating with ground forces. It required patience, spatial awareness, and a willingness to fly low and exposed. In Vietnam, that meant seeing the war up close, often at altitudes where individual faces were visible. By early 1968, Thompson was assigned to the 123rd Aviation Battalion, operating in Quang Nhi Province. This was not a quiet area. It had a strong Viet Cong presence and a reputation for hostility toward U.S. forces. Like many Americans in Vietnam at that point, Thompson had absorbed the standard assumptions. Villages were suspect, civilians might be collaborators, and danger could come from anywhere. None of that made him unusual. What did make him unusual, though no one would have said it at the time, was how seriously he took the rules of engagement. Thompson understood the difference between combatants and civilians. That distinction was not abstract. It was drilled into pilots because misidentification from the air could get friendly troops killed or innocent people slaughtered. The job required restraint as much as aggression. Firepower without confirmation was a liability. Those habits mattered on March 16th. Thompson was not flying alone that day. His crew included Lawrence Colburn, a young door gunner, and Glenn Andreatta, his crew chief. All three were experienced enough to recognize normal combat behavior from something else entirely. They had flown medevac missions. They had seen civilian casualties caused by crossfire or artillery. They knew what that looked like. The mission assigned to Thompson that morning was routine for the area. Reconnaissance and support for a large ground operation being carried out by elements of Task Force Barker. Intelligence briefings had warned of significant enemy presence. The expectation was contact, possibly heavy contact. From the air, that expectation began to unravel almost immediately. Instead of seeing troops taking fire, Thompson saw groups of civilians moving away from American soldiers. He saw bodies in places where firefights didn't normally leave them. He saw wounded people who had not been treated and were not being evacuated. These were not single incidents scattered across a battlefield. They were patterns. At this point in the story, it's important to be precise. Thompson did not yet know the full scale of what was happening at My Lai. He did not have hindsight. What he had was situational awareness and the professional instinct that something was profoundly off. That instinct did not come from heroism. It came from training, repetition, and a baseline assumption that American soldiers were supposed to behave in certain ways. When the reality below him broke too many of those rules at once, Thompson noticed. And noticing was the first step. The operation that led American troops into My Lai began with confidence, and with assumptions that were already brittle. The unit on the ground that morning was Task Force Barker, a provisional formation built around the 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, 11th Infantry Brigade, Americal Division. Task Force Barker had spent months operating in Quang Nhi Province, an area known for strong Viet Cong influence and for villages that were deeply entangled with the insurgency. U.S. casualties in the region had been steady. Enemy contact had been frustratingly elusive. By early 1968, that frustration had hardened into expectation. Intelligence briefings for March 16th warned of a significant enemy presence in and around a cluster of hamlets known collectively as San My, which included the village Americans referred to as My Lai. The prevailing belief was that civilians would be absent, either having fled or actively supporting the Viet Cong. The village was described as a legitimate military target. Those assumptions mattered because they shaped how soldiers interpreted everything that followed. The plan was straightforward. Helicopter-borne infantry would insert early in the morning, sweep through the village, and engage enemy forces believed to be hiding there. Artillery and air support were available if needed. It was designed to be aggressive, fast, and decisive. What it was not designed to do was distinguish well between suspicion and confirmation. From the air, Hugh Thompson Jr.'s mission fit neatly into that structure. His OH-23 Raven was tasked with reconnaissance, flying low ahead of and around the advancing ground troops, identifying enemy movement, marking targets, and coordinating medevac if fighting broke out. It was a role that placed him directly above the unfolding operation, with visibility the soldiers below him did not have. That vantage point became critical. Early in the operation, Thompson did not observe the indicators he had been briefed to expect. There was no incoming fire directed at the helicopters, no visible enemy maneuvering, no organized resistance. Instead, he saw civilians, women, children, and elderly men moving through open areas. Some were running, some were wounded, none appeared armed. This alone did not prove a massacre. Civilians were often caught in combat zones, and fear did not always mean innocence. But as Thompson continued to circle, the anomalies accumulated. Bodies were visible in ditches and along paths where troops were advancing, not clustered as if hit by artillery or caught in crossfire, but placed where civilians would naturally move or shelter. Wounded people were left unattended, despite American medevac capability being immediately available. No effort was being made to secure or evacuate them. From an aviation perspective, this was operationally strange. From a human perspective, it was worse. Thompson attempted to clarify what he was seeing by coordinating with ground elements. He radioed observations. He asked questions. The response he received did not align with what was visible from the air. Reports of enemy contact did not match the absence of return fire. Descriptions of hostile forces did not match the people on the ground. This disconnect is important to understand. Thompson was not yet accusing anyone of crimes. He was trying to reconcile two incompatible pictures of the same battlefield. The rules of engagement were explicit. Unarmed civilians were not to be targeted. Suspected enemy had to be confirmed. Firepower was to be proportional and necessary. These were not abstract legal concepts. They were practical constraints meant to prevent chaos and friendly fire disasters. By mid-morning, Thompson had seen enough to know that those constraints were not being followed. The decision forming in his mind was not philosophical. It was procedural. Either what he was observing was being misinterpreted from the air, or something fundamentally wrong was happening on the ground. As the minutes passed, the first explanation became harder to defend. At this point, Thompson still had an option available to him that many others would later take: leave. Complete the reconnaissance loop, file a report, let command sort it out. Instead, he stayed. And by staying, he placed himself in a position where the next choice would be unavoidable. By late morning, the benefit of the doubt was gone. From his helicopter, Hugh Thompson Jr. was no longer trying to reconcile incomplete information. He was trying to understand behavior that no longer fit any legitimate military explanation. What he was seeing below did not look like civilians caught between opposing forces. It looked like civilians being hunted. As Thompson continued to orbit the area, he observed small groups of unarmed villagers being herded together by American soldiers. He saw people shot at close range. He saw bodies in ditches that were not consistent with artillery strikes or air-delivered ordnance. There was still no incoming fire, no sign of enemy positions, no evidence of a firefight that had gone wrong. This distinction matters because the most common defense offered later, that chaos and confusion led to tragic mistakes, does not align with what Thompson and his crew witnessed in real time. At one point, Thompson spotted a wounded Vietnamese woman lying in an open field. From the air, it was clear she was alive. He marked her position and radioed for a medic, expecting a routine evacuation. As his helicopter pulled away, Thompson watched a U.S. soldier approach the woman. Instead of rendering aid, the soldier fired his weapon, killing her. That moment was decisive. It removed any remaining ambiguity about intent. The woman was unarmed, wounded, and isolated. There was no tactical justification for her killing. Thompson did not need additional confirmation. He had just watched an execution. The helicopter returned to the area almost immediately. Thompson landed near a group of soldiers and confronted an officer on the ground. Accounts vary on the exact words exchanged, but the substance is consistent. Thompson demanded an explanation for what he had seen and was told that the killings were being handled, that they were part of the operation. That response did not reassure him. It confirmed his fear. From the cockpit, Thompson could no longer pretend that this was a breakdown of discipline limited to one or two individuals. The behavior he observed was widespread and systematic. Civilians were being rounded up, shot, and left where they fell. The village was being cleared not of enemy fighters, but of people. It is worth pausing here to emphasize what Thompson did not do. He did not fire on American troops. He did not immediately escalate to violence. He did not abandon his post in panic. His response was measured, deliberate, and grounded in procedure. He began actively intervening. Thompson repositioned his helicopter between advancing U.S. soldiers and a group of Vietnamese civilians sheltering near a bunker. From the air, he could see troops approaching with weapons raised. If they reached the civilians first, Thompson believed they would be killed. He made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Thompson ordered his door gunner, Lawrence Colburn, to train his weapon on the American soldiers and to fire if they attempted to harm the civilians. This was not symbolic. It was a real, immediate directive given under live combat conditions. Colburn later confirmed that he understood the order and was prepared to carry it out. At the same time, Thompson coordinated with Glenn Andreatta, his crew chief, to help evacuate the civilians. Andreatta entered the bunker area and began assisting survivors, while Thompson radioed for additional helicopters to extract them. This was not a dramatic stand made for witnesses. It happened quickly, under stress, and without any assurance that higher command would back him. Thompson was operating on the assumption that stopping the killing in front of him mattered more than the consequences he would face later. From a legal standpoint, his actions were extraordinary. From a moral standpoint, they were unavoidable. The situation on the ground had passed the point where reporting alone was sufficient. Thompson had moved from observer to obstacle. And once he crossed that line, there was no going back. By the time Hugh Thompson Jr. brought his helicopter down again, there was no ambiguity left, only urgency. From the air, Thompson had identified a group of Vietnamese civilians hiding near a bunker as American soldiers moved toward them. The pattern he had already witnessed told him what would happen next if nothing changed. He did not wait for permission. He did not request guidance. He descended and landed his OH-23 directly between the soldiers and the civilians. This was not a symbolic act. It was a physical obstruction. The helicopter skid settled into the dirt, rotors still turning. Thompson stepped out and immediately placed himself in the line of movement. He could see the civilians, terrified, unarmed, pressed into the earth. He could also see the soldiers advancing, weapons ready, treating the bunker as a hostile position. Thompson knew exactly what he was doing, and so did his crew. He ordered Lawrence Colburn, his door gunner, to aim his machine gun at the American soldiers and to fire if they attempted to harm the civilians. Colburn later stated that he accepted the order without hesitation. This was not confusion, it was clear command, given with full awareness of what it meant. Glenn Andreatta, the crew chief, moved toward the bunker to begin pulling civilians out. Andreatta was not armed for a confrontation. He was acting on trust. Trust that Thompson would hold the soldiers back, and trust that Colburn would protect them if that failed. At this moment, the situation was razor thin. American soldiers now faced a choice they had not expected to face that day. Advance past the helicopter and risk being fired upon by their own side, or stop. Some did stop. Others argued. None fired. Thompson confronted officers on the ground, demanding that the civilians be left alone and evacuated. One of those officers was Lieutenant William Calley. Accounts differ slightly on the wording, but the substance is not disputed. Thompson accused the unit of killing civilians and demanded that it stop. Calley rejected the accusation and asserted his authority. What matters here is not who raised their voice or who outranked whom. What matters is that Thompson did not defer. Rank did not resolve this situation. Proximity did. Thompson radioed urgently for additional helicopters to assist with evacuation. His voice was controlled, but the message was unmistakable. Civilians were in immediate danger, and extraction was required now. Eventually, helicopters arrived and began transporting survivors away from the area. As this was happening, Andreatta continued searching the ditch where bodies had been thrown. The sight was catastrophic. The ditch was filled with civilians who had been shot at close range. Among them, Andreatta noticed movement. He climbed down and found a young boy still alive beneath the bodies. Andreatta pulled the child free and carried him back to the helicopter. That image, an American crew chief lifting a Vietnamese child out of a pile of corpses, would later become one of the most enduring visual summaries of what Thompson and his crew did that day. It was not staged. It was not documented at the time. It was simply what happened. The child was evacuated and survived. This did not stop the massacre everywhere. It did not undo what had already been done, but it did save lives in that moment, in that place. It also irrevocably changed Thompson's position in the operation. He was no longer a neutral observer or a supporting element. He had directly interfered with the actions of a U.S. infantry unit. He had threatened force against American soldiers. He had contradicted an officer in the field during an active operation. There is a temptation, in hindsight, to frame this as a heroic standoff. Clear lines, clear villains, a decisive moral victory. The reality was messier. The situation de-escalated, not because authority intervened, but because momentum stalled. Confusion, hesitation, and the sudden presence of witnesses altered behavior. Thompson did not win an argument. He bought time. Once the civilians near the bunker were evacuated, Thompson resumed flying over the area. What he saw confirmed that the violence was broader than what he had physically blocked. But the landing had marked a boundary. It demonstrated that someone was willing to intervene, visibly and forcibly. That mattered more than Thompson realized at the time. The helicopter eventually lifted off, but the line he crossed did not disappear with it. From this point forward, Thompson was implicated, not in the crime, but in its exposure. He had made himself a witness who could not plausibly be ignored. The hardest part of his day was not the confrontation on the ground. It was what came next, trying to make sure what he had seen and what he had stopped did not vanish into silence. Once Hugh Thompson Jr. lifted off from the village, the immediate danger of the civilians he had helped evacuate was over. The larger problem was not. What Thompson had witnessed could not be explained away as a misunderstanding or an isolated lapse in discipline. It demanded to be reported clearly, directly, and without euphemism. He understood that much before his helicopter even returned to base. Thompson began reporting what he had seen almost immediately. He radioed his concerns during the mission and followed up after landing, describing the deliberate killing of unarmed civilians and the refusal of some ground forces to provide aid. These were not vague complaints. They were specific observations tied to specific actions. The initial response was not outrage. It was resistance. Some officers expressed disbelief. Others attempted to reframe what Thompson described as the unfortunate but inevitable result of combat. There were suggestions that he had misinterpreted events from the air or that the civilians were enemy sympathizers. None of these explanations addressed the core facts Thompson had reported. What followed was not an investigation in the modern sense. It was a quiet containment. Reports were softened, language was adjusted, the emphasis shifted from civilian deaths to enemy body counts. The incident was folded into routine after-action paperwork in a way that drained it of urgency. Thompson's account did not disappear, but it also did not trigger immediate consequences. This was not unique to My Lai. Vietnam-era reporting systems were designed to reward operational success, not to interrogate moral failure. High enemy kill counts were metrics. Civilian casualties were liabilities. The system was not built to handle a pilot accusing infantry units of mass murder. Thompson did not let the issue drop. He continued to raise concerns through his chain of command, reiterating that what he had seen could not be dismissed as collateral damage. Each attempt was met with diminishing returns. The further his reports traveled up the hierarchy, the more abstract and sanitized they became. There's an important distinction here. Thompson was not demanding punishment in the immediate aftermath. He was demanding acknowledgement. He wanted the killings recognized as wrong, not rationalized as necessary. That alone proved to be disruptive. For Thompson, this was the moment where the nature of the fight changed. Stopping the violence in one place had required decisiveness and physical presence. Stopping it from being erased required persistence in a system that preferred silence. He was now challenging not just individuals, but institutional self-protection. The cost of that challenge was not immediate. There were no formal reprimands at first, no direct threats. What emerged instead was distance. Thompson found himself isolated from peers who either did not want to know what he had seen or did not want to be associated with someone who insisted on talking about it. Years later, during formal investigations, Thompson's early reports would be re-examined and his testimony would become central to establishing what happened at My Lai. At the time, however, he had no way of knowing that. From his perspective, the system he trusted to correct itself had quietly chosen not to. The massacre had ended. The denial had just begun. The consequences of Hugh Thompson Jr.'s actions did not arrive quickly. When they did, they were not subtle. For more than a year after My Lai, the massacre remained largely buried. Then, in late 1969, journalist Seymour Hersh's reporting forced the story into public view. Formal investigations followed, and Thompson was called to testify about what he had seen and done on March 16, 1968. This time, his account could not be quietly filed away. Thompson testified before the Army's investigative bodies and later before Congress. His testimony was direct and unambiguous. He described the killing of civilians, the failure of ground units to provide aid, and his decision to intervene. He did not hedge. He did not soften his account to protect reputations. That made him a problem. Within segments of the military and the public, Thompson was recast not as a witness, but as a traitor. He was accused of exaggeration, disloyalty, and of turning on his fellow soldiers. The fact that he had threatened to fire on American troops as an act that saved civilian lives was twisted into evidence of betrayal. The backlash was intense and personal. Thompson and his family received hate mail. Some messages included death threats. Others accused him of undermining the war effort or dishonoring those who served. This hostility did not come only from anonymous civilians. It also came from fellow veterans who believed that exposing My Lai gave ammunition to anti-war critics. For Thompson, the isolation was profound. He had not sought publicity. He did not profit from his testimony. His military career did not benefit from his actions. Instead, he found himself increasingly marginalized, treated with suspicion rather than respect. In a culture that valued unit loyalty above all else, Thompson had violated an unspoken rule by refusing to stay silent. It is important to be precise here. Thompson was not universally condemned. Some veterans and officers supported him privately, but public acknowledgement of that support was rare. Silence was safer. The contrast between Thompson's treatment and that of the perpetrators was stark. Lieutenant William Calley, convicted for his role in the massacre, became a cause célèbre among some segments of the American public. Fundraisers were held in his name. Political pressure led to his sentence being commuted. He ultimately served only a fraction of his life sentence under house arrest. Thompson, by comparison, received no immediate recognition. There were no medals, no public commendations, no institutional effort to protect him from harassment. The Army neither punished him nor defended him. That ambiguity was its own form of abandonment. Psychologically, the toll was heavy. Thompson later spoke about the long-term effects of being labeled a traitor for doing what he believed was right. The stress affected his health and his sense of belonging within the institution he had served. And yet, he never recanted. Through years of scrutiny and hostility, Thompson maintained the same account. He did not embellish it. He did not retreat from it. Consistency became its own form of proof. By the time the public narrative began to shift decades later, the damage had already been done. Thompson had paid the price not for committing a crime, but for refusing to ignore one. For decades after My Lai, Hugh Thompson Jr. lived in a strange historical limbo. His account of what happened on March 16, 1968 was accepted as accurate, yet the institution he had served showed him little interest in formally acknowledging what he had done to stop it. That began to change in the 1990s. As the Vietnam War receded into history, the emotional temperature surrounding My Lai shifted. Scholarship became more precise. Primary source testimony was re-examined. The focus slowly moved from just identifying perpetrators to understanding the few individuals who resisted the violence. In 1998, 30 years after the massacre, the U.S. Army awarded Hugh Thompson Jr. the Soldier's Medal for heroism not involving conflict with an enemy. The citation recognized his actions in placing his helicopter between American troops and Vietnamese civilians, ordering his crew to protect non-combatants, and coordinating their evacuation. By that point, the award was overdue. Thompson did not receive the medal quietly. The ceremony was public, and for the first time, the Army formally acknowledged that his intervention had been both legitimate and honorable. Lawrence Colburn, his door gunner, received the Soldier's Medal at the same time. Glenn Andreatta was awarded the medal posthumously, having been killed in Vietnam just weeks after My Lai. The delay matters. Recognition 30 years later did not shield Thompson from the harassment he had endured. It did not repair his career or undo the psychological damage of being labeled a traitor for most of his adult life. What it did do was set an official record, one that could not be ignored or quietly refiled. The Army's acknowledgement also carried an implicit admission. Thompson had not misunderstood the situation. He had not overreacted. He had acted correctly in a moment when others had failed. Even so, the recognition was careful. It honored individual bravery without dwelling too deeply on institutional failure. There were no sweeping reforms announced, no broad apologies issued alongside the medals. The story was framed as an exception, not a warning. Thompson accepted the award without triumph. He did not use the moment to condemn the Army or revisit old grievances. Those who attended the ceremony noted his restraint. The medal was not a vindication in his eyes. It was a confirmation. By the time of his death in 2006, Hugh Thompson Jr. was increasingly recognized by historians and veterans alike as a moral outlier. someone who proved that alternatives existed even in the worst moments of the war. The honor came too late to change his life, but it came early enough to change how history would remember him. The story of Hugh Thompson Jr. is uncomfortable precisely because it removes excuses. My Lai is often explained through abstractions: stress, fear, bad intelligence, poor leadership. All of those things were present. None of them explained Thompson. He operated under the same conditions, with the same briefings, in the same battle space. He did not have better information. He had better judgment. That distinction matters. Thompson's actions exposed the weakness of one of the most common defenses offered after atrocities, that no one could have known better in the moment. He knew better in the moment, not later, not after investigations or hearings. He knew while it was happening, from the air, with seconds to decide. This does not make him superhuman. It makes him inconvenient. Large institutions depend on predictability. They function by narrowing acceptable behavior, by rewarding compliance, and by discouraging deviation, especially under stress. In combat, that pressure is amplified. Obedience becomes survival. Dissent becomes risk. Thompson accepted that risk anyway. What he demonstrated is that individual responsibility does not disappear inside a hierarchy. Orders matter, but they are not absolution. Uniforms confer authority, not moral immunity. These are easy statements to agree with in theory. They are much harder to act on when the people you are confronting wear the same insignia you do. This is why Thompson's story has always been treated cautiously. Celebrating him too loudly raises questions institutions would rather avoid. If one pilot could intervene, why didn't others? If one crew could refuse to participate, how widespread was the knowledge that something was wrong? These questions do not end neatly. They spread. There is also a temptation to frame Thompson as an exception so rare that it proves nothing. That framing is reassuring, but it is incomplete. Thompson was not operating outside military values. He was enforcing them. The rules of engagement existed. The distinction between combatant and civilian was explicit. The prohibition against killing non-combatants was not ambiguous. What failed at My Lai was not the absence of rules, it was the collapse of restraint. Thompson's presence forces a reframing of heroism. In war, courage is usually defined by aggression, by advancing, closing with the enemy, pressing the attack. Thompson's courage took the opposite form. He slowed things down. He stood in the way. He said no. That kind of courage is harder to celebrate because it does not align with momentum. It interrupts it. The most enduring legacy of Hugh Thompson Jr. is not that he stopped a massacre. He didn't. It is that he proved stopping was possible at all. That knowledge lingers, quietly, in every retelling of My Lai. And it refuses to let the story end comfortably. Hugh Thompson Jr. did not end the My Lai massacre. He stopped part of it, and for that, he spent years paying a price most of the men who carried out the killings never did. His story is unsettling because it eliminates the comfort of inevitability. It proves that someone saw what was happening, understood it instantly, and chose to intervene anyway. Not later, not safely, right then. History is full of people who claim they would have acted differently if they had known. Thompson did know, and he acted. The hardest target, it turns out, was never the enemy. It was his own side. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And until next time, stand tall.
He's a Dave, dude. Dave's got to stick together, you know what I mean?